Just first of all, really quick note, if I sound nasally at all throughout the video, spring has sprung and so has the pollen's attack on me. Hay fever is not fun, but this video is, so watch it. Horror as a genre is pretty difficult to get just right. As anything, horror itself is subject to each person. However, it's clear that there are just certain shared experiences and just general themes that make us feel uneasy. A dark hall in your house at night, being alone out in the street. Scenarios that are either new or uncommon for us or could pose a real danger given a worse outcome. Most people don't usually see their house at night and don't have the cracked up sleep schedule of an actual raccoon to be able to see their house in this twisted version of itself. Where without the light of day, you either have the choice of 1, turning on the big light and flashbanging yourself and possibly waking up others in the house, or traversing through with a flashlight, giving the situation that strange feeling. While horror may be difficult to get just right when that is your intention, if you're somebody who watches videos about the genre often, there's a lot of content out there detailing on why certain medias just didn't hit the mark. Horror can sometimes be formed on pure accident, often creating an even greater fear factor. When we're playing horror games, we have the knowledge that what we're getting into is meant to be scary and we anticipate it. But when it comes to something completely unintentional, we're unable to do so, and therefore the scare is far larger than if we had the time to brace for it. Whether it's uncanny visuals due to limitations of the time, or music that wasn't properly thought out for the game style itself, horror can emerge in some of the weirdest of places. And in this video, I plan on going through a few of them, detailing on what went wrong or simultaneously pointing out a few examples on why some of these were most likely intentional. Or just pushing that mark a bit too far for the game's audience. And just as a note, like I said before, horror is subjective. Some of you will find the things I put in this video scary, some of you won't. Don't bitch about it in the comments. And on top of this, I also tried to grab a few that aren't really talked about as much, as of course this isn't an original concept. There are multitudes of videos out there being top 10 scariest video game moments, top 10 times the game got spooky. So a big thanks to all of my wonderful viewers that are over in the Discord server for helping me out in researching for this video by giving me many of the examples that I'll be showing in this video. If you want the chance for my next video to include your own suggestions, make sure to join so you don't miss the next time I put out a call for them. But with that all out of the way, we can get into the list. Starting off, I want to point out a few that were suggested quite a bit, but were eventually scrapped from the video due to most of the horror factor of them being due to intentional stylistic choices on the side of the developers. One big game that I saw popping up a lot whilst making the video is Subnautica, a very well known game, but for those who are unaware, Subnautica is a survival action-adventure game taking place on the alien planet of 4546b. After the Aurora, a massive spacecraft owned by the company Altera Corporation crash lands into its largely expansive ocean surface. The game starts us off in our own life pod with the goal of exploring and upgrading our tech, building a base, and eventually making our own ship to leave the planet on. Meanwhile, learning a lot about the advanced alien civilization that used to be here before us, and what they were up to in the bases that now littered the barren planet. Oh wait, did I say barren? One aspect the game prides itself in is the diverse array of aquatic species the game has to offer, starting from smaller fish used mainly as food sources to medium-sized predators to large hulking leviathans who prowl the dark depths of the ocean. I mean, one leviathan is quite literally called the Ghost Leviathan, being one of the biggest in the game, that can be found in an area known as the Crater Edge, or the Void. And you're gonna try and argue with me that the game doesn't intentionally play off the idea of thalassophobia? Subnautica quite plain and obviously is intentional with this direction of playing off of the player's fear of the ocean and not knowing what could possibly inhabit it. Environments present throughout the game show off both beautiful scenes of color and alien evolution that are paired along with these dark, indiscernible locations where the water begins to block out the light, making a false fog effect. And while somebody like me who isn't afraid of the ocean and focuses more on the cool biological aspects of the game probably won't be scared through a lot of the gameplay, the game is pretty clearly made with those of a fear of the ocean in mind, and it plays off of that quite well. I suggest playing it or watching someone play it if you haven't already. It's an absolute classic for me and to this day still holds up as being pretty fun to mess around in. But at the end of the day, its horror factors are intentional. Gary's mod, and by extension any mention of the source engine, is something that I'm going to be keeping out of the video. While there's the first argument for the whole, whoa guys, single player Gary's mod is so spooky ooky, look guys, silly multiplayer game is eerie when there's no silly multiplayer stuff going on and when I purposely accentuate all of the spooky aspects of an engine designed for a totally different game. Being beaten into the Earth's mantle at this point, Gary's mod is built upon the source engine, specifically being derived mostly from Half-Life 2, being its origin as a Half-Life 2 mod, before eventually becoming its own thing whilst still using the same engine. But with Half-Life 2 being a game meant to give off that unease of being a fugitive trying to slide through the grim backends of an enslaved city now run by a far powerful destructive alien empire, it's quite purposeful with the themes that it shows. I mean, enemies such as the head crabs and by extension the zombies made for them speak for themselves. The Combine are a fearsome empire with horrific actions to accompany them. I mean, just look at the Stalkers! There's also the whole thing that went around for a time about the corpses in the sewers being textured with real burnt bodies. Just, in general, Half-Life as a series is meant to have a sense of fear with it, or at the very least has its fair share of spooky undertones, which will of course carry on into Gary's mod. While it's meant to be a silly sandbox game, it is a sandbox game, and therefore can and will be used for anything. Something which I'll be coming back to in my next video, where I'm going to be going through a pretty popular set of add-ons and their timeline throughout the years. Portal is also no exception either. Aperture and the experiments and tests were often deadly, or at the very least immoral. We're made to feel like a lab rat in an abandoned and left-to-rot facility ran by a highly intelligent, sadistic AI. Who, spoilers, but at this point Portal 2 is like over 10 years old. If you haven't played it yet, that's your own fault. Is the unwilling participant of a mind transfer into a computer now called GLaDOS, standing for Genetic Lifeform and Disk Operating System. This unwilling transfer gives her a disdain for those who put her in this new situation, giving her the killer urge to test these people to their graves, using many manipulative tactics to usher them on. And especially in the second game, where we get to the actual disarray of the facility and the unsafe tests being performed on them even before GLaDOS took over, and the psychological effects and how the facility has affected the robots that still keep it somewhat functioning. Then there's the whole thing with Ratman, which come on! I remember discovering one of Ratman's hideouts as a kid, and I couldn't sleep that night because the weird noises freaked me out that much. Definitely something that I'll be coming back to on a later date, just not for this video. The horror here is intentional. And before we start, we have a series that I was debating putting in either or for intentionality. But Legend of Zelda is a series that, compared to most of the main Nintendo series like Kirby, Pokemon, Mario, or Animal Crossing, which, oh, we'll be coming back to one of you later on, is a series that generally embraces these darker stylistic choices of itself. I mean, just take the entirety of Twilight Princess for an example. The whole game is built to have a darker, more gothic and moody aesthetic to match the Twilight itself, and just breaking it down to its basic form, Ganon, our main antagonist in the series, is often referred to things like the Demon King, or the King of Evil, or the Prince of Darkness, who reincarnates time and time again with the sole purpose of hatred towards the world, and wishing to take it over for himself and twist it into his own dark image. In most games, Ganon takes the form of either a more humanoid figure, being the one and only male Gerudo that's born every 100 years, destined to become king and eventually use this position of power for his own gain, or as a more beastly, boar-like demonic appearance. The Legend of Zelda has a lot of different examples of darker tones being shown in its games, and is, for the most part, a game that is intentional with this. With Link being a warrior, the series shows that sometimes being a warrior will take you to dark places. But accompanying these dark themes, the game is also prevalent at more lighthearted and sillier aspects of itself. The series isn't meant to be a downright horror, but it prevails at times that give off those creepy scenarios that make you think that it would be. Just In general, the series is pretty hard to place here, but if I had to give a few examples, we have probably the most popular example, Dead Hand, a mini-boss found at the bottom of the well in Kakariko Village, as well as in the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time. Due to its pale and bloodied zombie-like appearance, location, and fighting mechanics of the disembodied arms grabbing hold of Link, restricting his movement, Dead Hand is referred to as one of the more terrifying enemies in the series. And I mean, who could blame you for thinking that? The way his body wiggles and contorts as he slowly approaches a struggling Link is nightmare-inducing enough. But having that be one of the main ways to get Dead Hand close enough to hit it is a whole other thing. On top of this, as well as a few others I'll list here, also is the added ambiguity of the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask models. The lower poly looks of the game and the limitations of the N64 leave a lot to the imagination, which just adds to the fear factor that little bit more. A similar enemy are the Redeads, once again feared for their appearance and the unnerving sounds that they produce. With the main mechanic also restricting Link's movement with their paralyzing gaze. Redeads are what can be found under the gauze of the Gibdos. They lurk inside of dungeons or other dim underground environments due to their weakness to light, and they're generally a pretty creepy reoccurring enemy to encounter in the series. And finally, for a more modern example, the Blood Moons in both Breath of the Wild and by extension Tears of the Kingdom are definitely a good scare on a first playthrough. For me personally, Breath of the Wild was the first game in the series that I played and what got me into the series, and when suddenly running around whimsyful in the Hyrule Field turns into a panic run due to the sky shifting to a red hue, and the once peaceful soundtrack ramping up in speed to this more impactful one occurs, it's pretty spooky. This is only added onto in Tears of the Kingdom where the Gloom is introduced, spawning these arms that chase after Link, sometimes even spawning in a phantom version of Ganon himself during these Blood Moons. And let's not forget the unbridled panic that can be awoken by just a few piano notes. There are a lot more examples in the series taking this darker approach, whether on purpose or an accident. It's mostly on purpose. The Moon from Majora's Mask, the Happy Mask Salesman from Majora's Mask, Skull Kid or Majora from Majora's Mask. There are a lot of examples from Majora's Mask. But just to cap things together, just because the majority of the game may focus on another theme or a part of the game that isn't horror related, it doesn't mean that anything horror related in the game is unintentional. But to not bloat the video too much, let's get into the real examples of unintentional horror. But if you guys do want me to make a proper video going in depth on the Zelda series, let me know. Star Fox is a series that is beloved to many, being one of the best-selling games for the N64, being the first to include the use of the console's Rumble Pack. Basically the reason why you can't put a controller down anymore without hearing while you're in the kitchen trying to grab another pack of mini cheddars, because the bags are far too small to only have one at a time. I know they call them mini, but the portion size doesn't have to be. Throughout the series, we play as Fox McCloud, one of many and a great cast of anthropomorphic characters, which most definitely led to a large increase of people entering the furry fandom. And for a large majority of Star Fox 64, we find ourselves battling it out in these vastly open environments. Well, as vast as a linear rail shooter can be. The game contains many action-packed levels requiring the player to use the assistance of the cast and their various abilities to help them through the branching level choices. However, no matter which branch you go down, all levels eventually lead to the final boss level of the game, Venom, where we finally confront the series antagonist, Andross. Starting Venom, we're greeted by a grim, rocky environment. The sky is cloudy, simultaneously darkening the level. There are two separate paths for the level. The easier path requiring Team Star Fox to defeat waves of enemies, then encountering a rock golem boss, before being able to go and fight Andross. Whereas in the harder route requires the team to face off against an upgraded version of the opposing team, Team Star Wolf, led by Wolf O'Donnell, being Fox's main rival of the series. But after either goal is cleared, Fox states that he'll go on onwards alone, descending deep down into Andross's base below the surface of Venom, where once again, depending on the route, we're either greeted by a long tunnel or a winding maze, both encasing us in this claustrophobic area where the dark shadows make it difficult to see where we're going, as Andross himself taunts us over the comms. Finally, getting to the end of the tunnel, we find Andross in the form of a large disembodied head with hands to match. as an odd green fog fills the space around us. To advance the fight, we must shoot at Andross's eyes, which cause him to leave one of his hands vulnerable to attack. This loop continues until both hands are destroyed, causing Andross's face to quite literally explode and melt off to reveal the horrifying visual of the now floating brain and eyes, as we gain the ability to freely fly about the arena, which in itself has an uneasy largeness to it. Andross's eyes are the first to be destroyed before going in for the brain itself, after which Andross announces that if he has to go down, he's gonna take us with him, as he begins to self-destruct, with the only thing saving us being the guidance of Fox's supposedly dead father, James McCloud. However, his own fate is never mentioned. The fight itself is relatively short, however the visuals it brings is definitely one to have nightmares about. Fuck the skeletal system, the nervous system is the thing that we should be making monsters of. For a game that's based mostly around the action-packed aspects of itself, it's a safe bet to say that the design was meant to be more imposing or give off a sense of power rather than downright fear. But to give it credit, it seems to be more on the fault of once again the N64's limitations. Looking at some of the other bosses in the game, specifically ones like Volcane or Raccoon, we can see this also being the case, as their separate art outside the game or other iterations, like in the 3DS version of the game, don't share the same limitation and leaves a lot less to the imagination. Unlike Andross, who somehow is even scarier looking with the added detail. Plague Inc. is a game that tackles the themes of infectious epidemic outbreaks. The game itself themes around being a puzzle/strategy game where you play as an unknown entity creating and evolving various diseases, viruses, parasites, etc., with the end goal of killing off the human population. And while the game seemingly is themed more with the purpose of education about these various outbreaks, especially after the big C-19 as they've added a multitude of info pages about the virus and especially in the world we live after it, it creates a very real sense of fear since we've now seen the situation the game includes firsthand. A world where an epidemic has taken over is a very real concept to us now. But even before, with the game coming out in 2012, the various stylistic choices of the game just made it really eerie to play. From its soundtrack to the way we see Earth shut down before our very eyes, the game that's mostly played as a hat I named my disease my butt and now that's gonna pop up on every notifications and follows along the destructive urge most of us has to destroy the Earth, can quickly switch up to this horrifically empty feeling scenario. Depending on how you play, a simple cough can turn into a fatal illness a few days later, speccing into specific symptoms that can go as far as driving people insane or cause large open wounds to litter the infected, with the main fear factor of the game coming from the realism of these symptoms. Aside from the game's special plagues, most of the things seen in the game are a pretty real possibility, and whether the game intends for this to be scary or not, it can be quite frightening to think about. Wait, I can explain myself. Rainworld is a game where you play as a few various members of a species known as slug cats, in the ever-expansive regions that are found within the game's megastructure. Each slug cat has its own story and end goal as we traverse the given area, with the main gameplay loop revolving around eating enough to fill up our hunger and go to the next karma cycle while avoiding the many predators that use varying tactics to try and cause our demise. Which, while being really cool in and of itself on a biological viewpoint, can unintentionally cause some really panic-inducing segments of the game, as we feel much smaller than those hunting us down. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? One way the game pushes this panic is with the creature's programmed AI. And no, I don't mean that fucking shitty doo-doo fart version of AI. Each creature has its own thought process to match its hunting styles. Take for example the various lizards in the game. Some can climb, some can leap, some fucking camouflage and lead to the most bullshit deaths you've ever fucking seen, and due to the massive variety of creatures that can be found, nowhere is ever truly safe. Each creature has specifically evolved to master its environment and makes our puny little self have to discover their weaknesses in order to even stand a chance against them. However, panic and horror are two totally different things. You can panic as you get free blue shells lodged in the back of your skull right at the finish line in Mario Kart, but does that mean that you're scared? No! Rainworld is a stressful game, and that is what it sets out to be. But one section of the game specifically stands out to most to lean a little bit too far into that aspect. That being the Shaded Citadel. The Shaded Citadel can be found somewhat early into the game, however its fear comes from an aspect found within its name. It's dark. Traversing the Shaded Citadel is almost impossible without knowing the layout by memory or by carrying some form of light source. Combining that in with the already stressful gameplay of the rest of the game and you have a pretty scary environment. And just to add insult to injury, the fact that the only aggressive creatures found here are spiders and the Miros birds, creatures which can be argued to be the scariest the game has to offer due to their speed, size, and strength. You have a genuinely scary environment to traverse. Pikmin 2 is a real-time strategy game where we play as Captain Olimar, who in the second title returns to the planet of Pikmin in order to collect treasure with the help of both the Pikmin and his new co-worker Louie, so that they can pay off a large debt their employers at Hocate Freight have been given, after a large shipment of golden Pikpik carrots is lost. The series is much like Rainworld in the aspect of it being a very stressful one, while the game stylistically is very silly and cutesy. The challenge of keeping the Pikmin alive and multitasking between characters as we traverse the locations of the planet from the many enemies that seek to kill or eat our Pikmin can be very daunting, but one section of the game specifically stands out amongst the rest for this video, that being the Submerged Castle, or as it's known in Pikmin 4, the Engulfed Castle. Upon arriving here, we're restricted to only using our blue Pikmin due to the cave entrance being blocked off by water. In the sublevels to follow, an eerie track backs the dull grey environment where all elemental hazards can be found. And to top it all off, if we're unfortunate enough to spend 5 minutes in any of these sublevels, a new threat emerges. The water wraith is an unbeatable threat, meaning the only way of dealing with it is to run from it. It will crush our Pikmin if close enough and can only be fought against in the final sublevel, where we regain access to the purple Pikmins being the water wraith's only weakness. But in that time, it's quickly able to cement itself as something we should fear the arrival of and forces us to speed up during our time here, usually leading to more mistakes being made. And to make matters worse, multiple dialogues in the game state the creature to cause psychological damage. All witnesses report being suddenly overcome with fear upon sighting the creature, approaching a state of panic and near insanity. In fact, every report contains an inordinate amount of extremely vague details, which has led to suspicions that exhaustion and fear have caused some simple natural phenomenon to be viewed as a living creature. Inedible, known to cause mass hysteria, followed by leg spasms and internal thunderings. A living thing is a living thing, even if it transcends our understanding. This unnerving creature is translucent and has no actual physical body to speak of. Yet, somehow, it clutches its rollers with zealous devotion. It's both eerie and fascinating. Don't you agree? Up until we're able to fight back in the final sublevel of the Submerged Castle, the water wraith holds itself as a serious threat, and subsequently appears again in the Engulfed Castle in Pikmin 4, where it acts basically the same, with only a few text differences from the characters. Things going wrong is not an uncommon occurrence in our daily lives. And when it comes to digital devices, developers needed a way to know that something had gone wrong and exactly what went wrong. However, when it comes to something as important and not to mention expensive as a digital device, it can be quite a scare when it occurs. being on par with something like an anti-piracy screen, which I chose to leave out of the list due to some of them being partially made to scare those who did pirate the game, but also after it became a trend to make fake piracy screens. It just didn't feel necessary to talk about them anymore. Error screens can be found on basically every device, with a few majorly known ones being things like the Windows Blue Screen of Death, Xbox's Ring of Death, or the PlayStation's Red Screen of Death. Lots of death. In specific, the PlayStation's Red Screen of Death is one that can cause quite a scare. The sudden blast of red accompanied by the statement that a serious error has occurred can be terrifying to those not knowing what had caused it. And more commonly, the PlayStation 2's screen for an unknown disc being inserted being the most frightening, with its sudden sound change being iconic for the system. For it being the most tame of the errors, usually just being an incorrect or scratched disc, or at worst being a malfunctioning disc reader, it is certainly strange for it to appear as such a serious problem. As well as this, the Xbox's Red Ring of Death can be subsequently as light as just an overheating issue to the direct hardware failure of the console, and is usually what signifies the console's time being up. But just the knowledge of something not being right with the device is enough for it to be eerie, let alone the fear that these red lights bring with it. Red as a color can be used to symbolize a lot of things and is a very powerful color. It can symbolize things like love and courage and passion, or it can lead to things like anger or power. Red as a color is very aggressive and can be very scary when it just pops up on your screen like that. And then there's also the errors themselves sometimes, but that's something that's already been documented far enough. Sky, Children of Light is an MMO containing a multitude of beautifully crafted environments that the player is tasked with spreading light through, in order to combat against the darkness that has taken over the lands. In each segment of the game, we can find other spirits and players that help us guide us through our journey, with each section ending off at a large temple where we're able to send off the spirits we have found to unlock various items, upgrades, or cosmetics. The game is one based around cooperation and encourages interactions between other players. And even when playing on your own, exploration will lead to finding stories of how the spirits got to where they are now, after the darkness had emerged and froze them in time until we came along. And seeing all the little stories and the interactions that you can get in-game are some of the really cute aspects of the game. It's a very light-hearted game to play, and it's one of the aspects that the game prides itself in. However, in a few segments of the game, this is heavily conflicted with the introduction of the Dark Dragons, more commonly known as the Krill. In certain environments you may encounter the Krill, large beasts of darkness which patrol sections of the area, and bringing back in what I said at the end of the last segment, on the front of their heads a single blue light projects in front of it, and being unfortunate enough to get caught in it causes the light to turn red as the Krill charges towards you, and if you're lucky enough you might be able to avoid it. If not, however, you risk losing your light, which subsequently dampens your ability to fly away from the Krill. In contrast to the chill, peaceful gameplay of the rest of the game, the Krill serve to instill fear and panic. While originally serving as a level obstacle, being a powerful enemy, they instead come off as more frightening due to their appearance and mechanics, something which is pretty common with patrol-type enemies. We just have to be grateful that they picked this design over some of the other concepts.
Come on, let's move it.
Dog's Life is a game that released for the PlayStation 2 and lives among the style of games directed towards lifting the player of their regular responsibilities. Think like GTA, but you're a dog. So the worst you can do is shit on someone's lawn or something. And that would be the case if its free and up rating carried any kind of connection to the game itself. Tell me with full honesty that you think that by this cover, you'd believe me if I told you that we throw a woman into a meat grinder in this game. No, go on. Tell me. We open the game with Jake, our main protagonist, gloating on about the simplicities of dog life, until Daisy, our game's love interest, is suddenly snatched up by these two dog nappers, Dwayne and Wade. Jake begins to chase after the van and is inevitably caught himself. However, due to one of the back doors being left open, Jake's crate falls out of the back of the van, allowing him to escape, and good god, this game reeks of 2003 graphic limitations. Guess we can check that off the list. And after a quick tutorial to help us learn the game's controls and mechanics, we are set out into the game's decently open world. In each area we go through as we traverse throughout the game, we can find various collectibles, minigames, and other dogs who serve to have unique abilities that Jake lacks, such as being smaller, stronger, or faster. However, in between these segments is an eerie silence as the loading screens bring the music and joyful atmosphere to a screeching halt, dimming us to the low, cold light of a swinging bulb above us as a notebook containing various papers, seemingly evidence towards Daisy's captors, flips us to the next zone. It's just so jarring and out of place compared to the bright, warm levels we come from. And this isn't the only offender we'll find in the game. Now, the rest of the game itself isn't all that bad. It just plays out like a pretty average collectathon style game. We just do our tasks and minigames, some more annoying than others, but we go about collecting bones, and even though the sound system of the game is pretty poorly implemented as the music will just cut and reset itself often, instead of just fading out or lowering whilst other audio plays on top, most of the tracks in the game are actually pretty enjoyable to listen to, especially some of the minigame tracks. Which makes the end of the game all the more confusing. See, during or after certain missions, we learn bits and pieces about where the dog nappers are heading, what they're up to, how they're somehow incapable of reading road signs, but it all eventually leads us to Boom City. We make it to the dog pound, with the dog nappers also getting there at the same time no matter what. Sneaking past this guard, we make our way in and... oh, just give it a minute. Dear God, what in the fresh 2012's creepypasta have we come into? I get it, a dog pound is scary, especially for the dogs themselves, but let me just take a good look at that game box again. Oh yeah, that's right. Not old enough for this! As Jake enters the dog pound, the sky turns cloudy and red as a thick red fog settles in. With the guard not too far behind us, and with Dwayne and Wade just coming in through the gates, they talk a bit, but it's nothing too important before we're greeted by a couple of other dogs that are kind of just outside in cartoonish style cages, as well as being shown the locations of the keys required to unlock the cages and free the dogs inside them. And it's safe to say that if the loading screen's lack of sound was eerie, I don't know what the developers were thinking. I don't know, maybe the sound team got confused and thought they were making the next Silent Hill. But whatever this is, it should not be in a game like Dog's Life. As we attempt to collect these keys, we are also accompanied by the guard and his dog, who consistently chase after us throughout the level. After freeing the other dogs, however, we money spread the guard dog who tries and fails to keep us out of the house of Mrs. Peaches, the game's main antagonist, who we find to be the owner of a cat food company. And in a conversation between Dwayne and Wade, she reveals that she plans on using the dogs in her big machine, quote-unquote, to make cat food, starting off with Daisy and then moving on to full production later on. We are then placed into the factory itself, where we can spot Daisy at the start of the big machine. She's unable to hear us, and so we must find a way to shut off each section of the machine before it's too late, even though she could quite literally just jump out of the tube at quite a few moments. And it's all just as simple as finding a lever or button and interacting with it. The conveyor moves quite slowly, giving us a lot of time to do so. At the end of the machine, Daisy is freed and we reunite shortly, before it is interrupted by Miss Peaches, who now has a fucking shotgun. And I shit you not, we defeat her by ripping a fart so rancid she is forced to back away from it, tripping over the guardrail and falling unconscious on the conveyor, which, in a light, jokey sense of irony, turns her into a giant can of cat food, before then suddenly deciding, psych, that's not good enough, and the conveyor reverses, grinding her up into smaller cans of cat food. make it make sense. And after this, I guess things go back to normal? Dwayne and Wayne don't seem to be bothered by this at all, and nobody in fact seems to be bothered by this at all. But this last section of the game is just so out of left field. I mean, some of the machinery in the factory even has some strange stains on it that are either rust or blood, and I'm gonna hope to God that it's not the latter. Just for a game being made by a big company like Frontier, who went on to make the Planet Coaster series or the Jurassic Park Evolution games, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And the irony of the game with a main plot of an evil pet food company being sponsored by a pet food company, you just can't make this shit up. For a shorter section of the list, we have more of a phenomenon or a mechanic rather than a specific section of any game. Time limits require the player to get through a specific part of a level, or to complete a level, or to simply get out of a specific area in a varying amount of time, and enforce a feeling of panic, with the punishment for not succeeding usually ending in bad consequences. For example, in Sonic, we drown if we don't get out of the water in time, and I can already hear that music coming back. Club Penguin's pizza minigame has not an on-screen timer, but the time limit being more of until the pizza gets to the end of the screen. I can also bring Majora's Mask back up if I wanted to beat the dead horse anymore. And then also Pikmin's Water Wraith runs on a time limit, with having 5 minutes until it spawns in. Time limits cause us to act more drastically as the end of the limit approaches, and whether intentional or not, are a mechanic that can be pretty scary without even trying to be. And possibly even scarier when they are. Hitting extremely close to home here, Viva Pinata is a sandbox gardening game that released in 2006, the best year by the way, for the Xbox 360, and aside from Minecraft was probably my most played game as a kid. I absolutely adored this game. We play as an unnamed gardener who at the start of the game comes across a crying Leafos, who serves as our main guide throughout the game. We help her clean up the garden and in doing so begin a long journey of restoring the garden to its former glory, earning upgrades, decorations, and villagers along the way, who supply us with various services, and of course, allow various new species of pinatas to move into our garden, all of which being very cute and having puns based around food for their name, who we must care for and provide the right living conditions for them to settle in, with more complex conditions being available as we gain new residents. And then we sell them for monetary gain. I need another reason to go back to Gretchen Fetchum so I can hear her voice again. I mean, so I can go and request another bunny comb because the Pretz Tails won't stop eating them. But the game plays out as a calm, peaceful experience. For the most part. At various times during the playthrough, with more of them being unlocked the further you play, sour pinatas are evil, dastardly versions of the pinatas, bearing a black and red color palette with green eyes, and honestly, I can see how that attached to me. Each of the sour pinatas have their own negative interaction with the garden, whether it's spitting out bad seeds, making your pinata sick, which, oh, you don't want that, scaring away visitors, or just throwing hands with your pinatas. However, they can be tamed and will gift you a block for the Tower of Sour, which, while lit, prevents sours of that species entering your garden. And it also means I get 2 separate versions of my favorite pinata. Why, are you surprised? Of course the raccoon's my favorite, look at this little guy. Its pun name is based on a macaroon and it's colored like one, you literally can't make this shit up. But on top of that, with the sours already being a bit spooky, we have the ruffians, a group of evildoers who will go around trashing your garden and you gotta beat them away with a shovel. Still not enough? Yeah! Death Stardust is an absolutely unrelenting entity in Viva Pinata, and quite frankly haunted my dreams for a good chunk of time as a kid. If a sick pinata is left untreated, then Death Stardust will come out from his rotting old decrepit tree and make an advance towards the pinata, as he can phase through any kind of obstruction and won't leave until his targeted pinata is taken care of. His eerie-looking mask, combined with the inevitability of his appearance on top of it being a pretty rare one if you just look after your pinatas, makes him an ominous feature of the game. I mean, just listen to his theme in the 3DS versions of the game. And before we get into our final section here, I just want to quickly talk about a small honorable mention. Oh, we'll be coming back to one of you later on. Kirby. A bright and cheery, mostly platforming game following the pink puffball known as Kirby as he defends Dreamland from the many games antagonists, with some of them being so common now that he just fights them on sight. And as a diehard Meta Knight fan, I really hope it stays that way. But with a series designed around the soft aesthetic stylings of Kirby himself, it's a bit of a shocker when you get to the final bosses of some of these games, only to be greeted by absolute nightmare fuel. And the reason for me putting these as an honorable mention is that, like with The Legend of Zelda, it was a bit of a toss-up where I should have put Kirby. On the one hand, the cutesy style of the series makes it clear to be aimed towards a bit of a younger audience. But at the same time, Kumazaki, the general director for the series, is known for his eerie and eldritch-styled paintings, making the designs of these bosses seem intentional, as they serve to represent the exact opposite of the design of Dreamland, being more nightmarish in design, making it clear that these are things to be defeated, not befriended. Take for example, probably the most popular example of Zero and Dark Matter. In Kirby Dream Land 3, we face off against Dark Matter at the end of the game, who is depicted earlier in the game as a dark expansive mass bearing a large red eye. A design which is slightly altered for this ending fight, now bearing a brown irised eye and 8 orange orbs surrounding its surface, which are lost after its defeat, as it twitches and pulsates before puffing away, causing Zero to take over. A very similar character being a white mass with a giant red eye once more. Smaller variations of Dark Matter assist Zero in this section of the fight as Zero itself opens up slits in itself to attack Kirby with bloodied projectiles, before eventually having its eye split from its body, where it then relentlessly charges after Kirby in a state of desperation. After this though, Dark Matter is removed from Dreamland and all is good again, until Zero 2 ends up returning again in the Crystal Shards. And much like with Dark Matter coming before Zero, we once again fight against Miracle Matter, a polygonal orb covered in similar red eyes, occasionally unfolding into one singular orb which we must use its own projectiles against to slowly whittle down, as its projectiles get more and more intense until it's defeated, allowing us to enter Dark Star, where we then face off against Zero 2, who now gains a more angelic appearance while retaining the features of its white body and opposing red eye. This time, the fight requires us to use its weak spots against it, those being its eye and the top and bottom of its form. The sky behind it is now a deep red, compared to the previous blue, with many dark rings spinning around us, sharing a similar style to Anophanim. And then once again, at the end of the fight, the darkness is destroyed and everything is happy again and there's fireworks. This style of boss also continues to antagonists like Drossia, who as well as having a really intense looking world, also shares the theme of turning into a horrific orb during her fight. And then Void just has a whole bunch of things going on here. In general, Kirby is a cutesy game, and even though these bosses are most definitely intentional in some form, it's a pretty far jump in style for its intended audience, and therefore it gets in here as an honorary mention. On top of this, there are a few mentions that were cut due to them already being talked about quite a bit, those being Minecraft's cave noises and just old alpha Minecraft in general, Pokemon's Lavender Town, Sonic CD's Fun is Infinite screen, Hale's doll from Sonic R, Gygus' fight from Earthbound, the Mario 64 piano in Big Boo's Haunt, and the early Sims games, in specifics the way that the ghosts are depicted and the old burglary themes. While these are all good examples of scary moments in these games, they already have a lot of good coverage on them. And finally, to end off the video, probably the big reason for this video being made, and also what I bet most of you expected would be in this video at some point, it's Piglet's Big Day. Being often described by those who have experienced the horror that is Piglet's Big Game as babies for Silent Hill. I don't know, maybe the sound devs of Dog's Life got a hold of this game too. Piglet's Big Game is a big tipping point for people discovering the joy that is unintentional horror. Piglet's Big Game is a game loosely tied, and I'm using loosely in big impact font here, to Piglet's Big Movie, which came out about the same time. In the movie, Piglet goes off on his own after being excluded by the rest of the cast due to his small size. As they go looking for him, they discover a scrapbook that details the importance that Piglet had in their lives, and through various fallings out and coming back together, the group eventually finds Piglet and there's a party, and it's a really sweet movie. The game, however, the game, starts off relatively the same way, with Piglet as our protagonist, obviously, as we traverse through each of the cast's dreams in order to help them with their own unique problems, with Piglet being the only one capable of helping them. Although, we do sometimes take control of the other characters too, as we face our own fears while encountering heffalumps and woozles. The tasks are mostly simple ones due to the game's younger target audience, with the big scary last antagonist just being a spooky shadow on the floor. However, that's not what we're here for. The game itself isn't all too bad. Just looking at the game, I'd say that it did its job in making a fun, silly kids game about being brave and getting over your fears and helping out your friends along the way. It's cute, it's sweet, but then I turn up my volume and suddenly it's a whole different experience. What? Huh? What? You had it perfect! You had a perfect little game, and then you go and grab Akira Yamaoka as inspiration! Throughout the game, we are bombarded by various tracks and sound design aspects that just don't fit the game at all. From looping record tracks to intimidatingly endless spinning bookcases. The sound designers for the game just pushed the mark way too far from the spooky zone into the scary one. And I'd forgive them for this. If one of the devs didn't quite literally state that Resident Evil was an inspiration alongside Luigi's Mansion. Luigi's Mansion, I understand. Silly, spooky game that remained silly and spooky throughout. Maybe a bit scary here and there, but remained relatively tame throughout. But Resident Evil? Just downright make the game a horror title at this point. It's already on the PS2, that's good enough reason to. It's clear that the developers were going for more of an unease for the game, but didn't quite manage to teeter in that sweet spot between mild spook and horror. And out of all the games on this list, it might just be the most striking difference in appearance and audio design. Piglet's big game was quite shocking for those who came in contact with it due to the contents of the game itself. It's a game based entirely around a kids movie, and for the dev team to implement something like this is beyond what anyone would expect going into it. And out of all games on this list, even with the given inspirations, it feels the most unintentional out of all of them. With, once again, the style of going for more of an unease or a spook, rather than making me feel like I should be shrouded in fog looking for my dead wife. And that's all I got for today. As a pattern for the games business, it's gotten a lot easier to get references on what fits a game and what doesn't. As is quite noticeable, a lot of these games are from the early to late 2000s, where a lot were just plagued by console limitations or a lack of someone trying a thing before them. Back then, it was a lot more of I'm going to see if this does well, and then either it does and the game is remembered fondly, or it doesn't, and well, you get a list like this one. For most, the creepiness is either embraced or it can be ignored to see the greatness that the rest of the game has to offer. And even in a worst case example, it ends up being a funny little mishap to look back on. Whether it's a game from your childhood you remember giving you nightmares, or just something you come across on accident one day. And these games definitely aren't the only ones. And if anything, games like these have spawned an entire different genre of horror. Games that start off regularly tame and then end up getting scary later on. Things like Doki Doki, Shipwrecked, Duck Season, Can Your Pet. Most, if not all of these games spawn from this kind of genre, going from a pure accident to something that is heavily leaned into. But even today, these accidents are still being made, and they definitely won't be the last. Feel free to leave your own examples in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching. Go eat a burger, eat some mold, and I'll see you next month. Bye-bye. I want to thank Patreons Aiden Ginty, Alex the Kobold, Bloody Eclipse, Mr. Lazyman, Cozy, and Crippled Fox for supporting the channel, as well as any supporters of my commissions over on Ko-Fi. You guys help me continue to make content for the channel and it is heavily appreciated.